Greetings everyone, this is Ahav Ever from the Chronicles of Ahav Ever, and today's video is considering Torath Mosheh. Is a Geir Toshav required to be a Jew? Now this particular topic came up from one of the videos I did concerning Noachides, and I think another one also. And essentially what it stems from is the internet anti-Noachide kind of movement. Now this is not to downplay or degrade those who are part of it, but this is just to present the perspective that it comes from. So the basic claims came from a couple of comments I got from a particular user or a commenter on one of the videos I did. And one of the first things I mentioned is that every living person in the land of Israel must keep the law, meaning adulterous religions are not allowed in the land of Israel. The next couple of things they mentioned was that a Geir Toshav, and this is in response to things I wrote back to them, would be subjected to capital punishment if not found keeping the entire law, for example, breaking the Sabbath, which is not among the 7 laws of Noach. Further to that, they say that the word used in Deuteronomy 17:2 is brito, which is the entire law of Moshe revealed to Yisrael after the Exodus. And lastly, they say that it says that a Geir Toshav is the same as a Yisrael, meaning an Israeli. Still not convinced. Let's look at Numbers 9:14. Now, the thing is, if you'll note, in the video I did about who exactly, what exactly a Noachide is and what, whether the Noachide laws, movement is a scam, you'll notice that in the video I actually answered it, like pretty much every one of these questions that the person brought up to task. Further, the particular places that they mention, I can tell that they're using an English translation rather than the Hebrew text because of the fact that they're using the title Deuteronomy rather than Devarim and Numbers rather than Bimidbar. And also one of the reasons is in a previous comment they kept using the word stranger. Now, one of the basic issues here with what they're writing is what they're writing is actually not correct. And it's more than likely because they're not reading the Hebrew text and they're instead reading an English translation. In reality, the Hebrew text is very clear that there's a certain type of Geir that's allowed in the land of Israel that is not keeping the laws of the Torah. And the Torah even commands that Jews can give them things to do that are actually forbidden for Jews. And not as like a way of saying that they're different, but just simply these are people who are not, have not taken on the Torah and are keeping the 7 mitzvot of Noach. And they're allowed to live in the land of Israel once it's proven that they've accepted the mitzvot of Noach, which one of the mitzvot of the 7 Noachide laws is not to do avodah zarah, or as the people in English would say, idolatry. Essentially, that's one of the requirements of Ben Noach. So when the first commenter says in their first statement that adulterous religions are not allowed, well, first of all, the concept of religion is a Western concept. But, in principle, yes, it is correct that anyone doing avodah zarah is not allowed in the land of Israel, including, also, the people who are Bnei Noach or people who are Geir Toshav. But we'll see in just a second that a Geir Toshav is not in any situation a Jew. It's from the Torah directly, as we'll see in just a second. So that's what I mentioned in a previous video, that sometimes the anti-Noachide position is not really based on truth. And what I will say is that it's not always because the people themselves are not being truthful, but it's just because they have accepted information from people who are not truthful, people who maybe have an agenda, and don't really use the Hebrew text of the Torah as their basis. So there are people who listen to these people and get emotionally attached to them and follow them. And often it's because of the fact that there are people who, essentially have them under the impression that the Jewish community is somehow hiding something from the non-Jewish world or preventing the non-Jewish world from something. So this leads into the fact that, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of opinion versus fact when it comes to this particular position. And I'll show you exactly where the facts are and not show you my opinions about them, for example. Okay, so a very simple proof to the fact that a Geir Toshav is not a Jew, meaning that a Geir Toshav is not under the mitzvot of being Jewish, and that is considered, something directly from the Torah. I'm going to let the Torah and Hashem speak for itself, because Hashem is the one who gave the mitzvot of the Torah, so I'm going to let that speak for itself. So again, what exactly is a good Torath Mosheh, the source? And I will stress that it's something that's ancient, authentic, and authoritative. So of course, if it comes directly from a Hebrew text of the Torah, it is all 3 ancient, authentic, and authoritative. And of course, the Hebrew text, as I mentioned before, is the authoritative text, not an English translation or anything like that. So let's get into what does the Torah state. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the Torah uses several different terms to describe different types of non-Jews or non-Jews in general. One is a Geir Toshav, and a Geir Toshav is a non-Jew who lives in the Jewish nation but is not a Jew. There's Nochri, and a Nochri is a general term for a foreigner, outsider, and Aralim. Aralim is basically an uncircumcised person. So let's get into exactly what the Torah says. Okay, so in the English text, if you were to use that, because I know that there are people who don't know Hebrew, and that's understandable, in what you would say is Deuteronomy 14:21, the Hebrew text states the following. Okay, in Devorim Yud Dalet Kaf Aleph, which again is like Deuteronomy 14:21 for people using the English text, it says the following. לא תאכלו כל נבלה, לג'רה שבשעריך תיתנו ואכלו, או מכור לנוכרי, כי עם קדוש אתה, לאדוני אלוהיך, לא תבשל לג'די בחלב עמו. So translated, starting from the yellow, which again Hebrew is read from right to left, the yellow part that I've highlighted says, לא תאכלו כל נבלה. So this is the mitzvah for the Jewish nation, for Jewish people, that Jewish people are not allowed to eat Neveilah. Neveilah is essentially an animal that has died of its own, meaning that if there's let's say I have a flock of sheep, and let's say I use them for food, but one of them, like I find that it died overnight on its own, or for example, just of natural causes. Essentially, as a Jew, I'm not allowed to eat that. Because as a Jew, I'm required to have what's called shechita, which is essentially where you basically slaughter the animal, with a certain type of knife that is, very sharp and no nicks in it, across the throat. It has to be only kosher animals. So any animal that dies of its own is Neveilah. Now, also according to Jewish tradition, any animal that's not slaughtered correctly is also considered Neveilah. So a Jew is forbidden to eat either A, an animal that dies of its own, and also B, even if it's a kosher animal, it doesn't matter if it's kosher or not. I mean, Jews are not allowed to eat non-kosher animals, but even a kosher animal that dies on its own of natural causes, we're not allowed to eat it. And then secondly, an animal that was like slaughtered incorrectly, that wasn't according to halakha, Jewish law. So in the green, and starting off with the section that's marked in red, it says, Lajir asher b'shorecho titano v'acholo. Now that translates into the Geir, or in Temet Yemena Hebrew, the Geir in your gates. Asher b'shorecho is in your gates. Titana v'acholo. So it says to give him the Neveilah, or her the Neveilah, and they will eat it. And then in the part that's in green, but it's not highlighted, it says, O mochor la nochri. So it says, or you can sell it to the nochri. So the nochri is someone who we mentioned earlier was an outsider. So essentially we have two components of this green section here. One, it says that there's a certain type of a ger at our gates, that can eat this, be given the Neveilah. It says the Jews are supposed to give them the Neveilah, or can give them the Neveilah, and they eat it. And then it says, or it can be sold to a nochri. So we looked over what that meant earlier, and then the part that's not highlighted or in any way, and it says, Ki am kadosh ato, l'Adonai Elohecho. So essentially it says that the Jewish people are a set-apart nation to the Creator of all things. So when a person could try to say, well, okay, well, this ger, who's at the gate, what kind of ger is that exactly? Because, there's a ger tzedek, which is a non-Jew who's converted to being Jewish, meaning that they've taken on the Torah and has agreed to live as a Jew. And I've covered that in other videos. But if you look at the Aramaic translation of the yellow and the green sections only, it says the following. Lo tachalon kol nevelo. That's in the yellow. So basically the same thing, that a Jew is not allowed to eat nevelo. And then in the green, starting with the first highlighted in red part, it says Lo tholthav aral divr girwoch titana nina lechlina. So the green part translated, the Lo thithav aral means a toshav. The aral means someone who's not circumcised. So it says div ger woch, which is like where, basically your place where you live, and it says titanaina, so you give to them. V'yechlina, so that means that they will eat. So essentially, what we have here is a situation where Hashem in the Torah states that a Geir Toshav is not a Jew. A Geir Toshav again is a non-Jew who lives in the Jewish nation, but not as a Jew. So when the text tells us in the Torah, Lajer asher b'shorecho, and it explains that this is a letothav aral, So essentially what the Torah is saying, that this is someone who's not Jewish, who is not circumcised, and is living amongst the Jews in the Jewish nation, and they're allowed to eat Neveilah. There's nothing bad about eating Neveilah. I mean, just simply as a Jew, because Jews are Am Kodesh, we're not allowed to eat Neveilah, but the non-Jewish world can. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about eating Neveilah. It's just simply that Jews are a set-apart nation, and there's set-apart laws that we are set apart to do. And every nation in the world has its own, mission, and all nations have benefits, to the Creator of all things. So it's just basically almost like being in the military. There's different branches of the military, just like there's different sections within the military, and it would be almost like saying that, look, being Jewish is just one branch of a military, and there's other parts of the military that are just as needed and just as effective as this one branch. So essentially, that answers this question, that no, Geir Toshav is not a Jew, and there's never been a requirement for people who accept the Sheva Mitzvot, who live in the land of Israel, who've been accepted by Bet Din, to live as Jews. And if the Geir Toshav was required to live as a Jew, then he wouldn't be able to eat Neveilah. So essentially, case closed, the end.